Longevity for the Long Haul, and this is Danny, your host. Today, I'm going to talk about a bunch of my favorite books that kind of led me to the places that I want everybody to go, basically. And it was really hard to decide, like, how do I show up and how do I talk about, the evolution of how I got to the point to where I am. And I woke up this morning and the first thought in my head was like, no one needs you more than you. Meaning when you have long COVID or you have a chronic illness and you're lying in bed and all you can think about is what you're not doing and who you're not helping. And that was like the biggest and the heaviest weight that I had to bear. And it's something I had to overcome and finally realize is that I need me more than anyone else needs me in order for me to recover and heal and do the things that I need to do. So that's the one message I want everyone to walk away with today is no one needs you more than you. You're not going to get better faster by trying to meet everybody else's expectations. And you got to really dig deep and learn more about your body and your biology and, just find responsible resources that can give you the kind of information that you need to make really great decisions moving forward. And I hope I'm one of those. So I wrote some of this down because I wanted to make sure that I said it, and I wanted to make sure that I made all my key points, the guilt and the shame that I felt by not being able to move efficiently, or to understand my own thoughts and my own words. Like that was the most difficult thing I had to endure. And as a result of my inability to move, I was left with my ability to listen. And we don't really learn how to listen, as well as we should, or we don't learn to value it. But I definitely, because I couldn't really make sense of anything else, that's what I was left with. So I'm lucky that I gravitated towards different authors and books that actually taught me more than what I thought I knew as an oncology nurse. So the first author I want to talk about is Galen. He dates back to 129 AD. He basically, they call him the Prince of Medicine. And whenever he existed, it was during the Greek and Roman times. And he actually, one of his jobs was to take care of gladiators. And back then, based on religious and political beliefs, you weren't allowed to do any kind of dissection of human beings. And at that point, he, carefully documented dissections of animals and things like that. He was actually the first person to actually cauterize a wound to kind of extend the life of a gladiator. He also kind of paid attention to what they were eating. So they had like thicker flesh. So when they were being cut in the arena, they would bleed more, but it would decrease the risk for them to actually damage like actual organs and die because they wanted their gladiators didn't just fight one fight. They fought multiple fights. But if you go back and you look at the attention to detail he had with his notes and during those periods of times and understanding like, again, it's like looking back in history, you can kind of understand the roles that pandemics play in society and how we all evolved. But Galen was my favorite because he's basically the father of anatomy and physiology, pathophysiology. He studied pharmacology, neurology, and his existence was based on logic, and I can't even imagine what he would be like now. I don't know if there's anybody else that's out there, but he existed and everything that he learned is the foundation of medicine today. And sometimes I'm shocked. I'll ask doctors, I'll be like, do you know who Galen is? And they're like, no. And then after I start talking about him and the things that he did and the time in which he was like practicing, they'll be like, oh yeah. But Galen was inspired by Hippocrates, and these are the people that he was surrounded himself were like great minds that were kind of still really connected to their origins of life. And they were also connected to society and creating culture that we all kind of well, that we all live with. Okay. So Galen was amazing. And so that was the point of whenever I was reading, I was trying to understand the roots of medicine, how different pandemics and plagues passed out, how like we evolved as society. And it wasn't until like we created, effective ways to deal with sanitation in larger cities that it stopped the spread of infectious diseases. And it's just the attention to details that other, doctors had as they were trying to figure out how to save people's lives or why people lived and why people died. It's like everything revolved around, natural selection. So The Prince of Medicine, the book about Galen, was published in 2014. And I'm going to be mentioning these publishing dates specifically because I want you to understand that everything that is being written in these books were written before COVID even existed. So my next favorite book, it is Survival of the Sickest. It was published in 2007 uh, by Dr. Sharon Mullen. And what she actually studied and documented and wrote an entire book about the different pandemics and plagues that affected society as a whole. And so what she explained is how viruses, how they affect us and how our body has the ability to create genetic mutations to outlive those current circumstances of that plague, that pandemic. Like many people remember like tuberculosis and understand, but there's a direct connect to cystic fibrosis. So genetically, the genetic mutations allowed people with cystic fibrosis to live longer than people who contracted tuberculosis. And then like think about malaria. Again, malaria is something that happened in Africa, and it's still an infectious disease that people get. And sickle cell anemia, people who had sickle cell anemia lived longer than those who got malaria. So these are all genetic mutations. And so she basically, in this book, what she highlights is the connections between diseases and longevity. And so this is where the longevity, that word, started to seep into my life. And then I started to look at the study of longevity as a source for me to kind of look for more clues to figure out how am I going to get on the other side of this. I want to pause for a second and just read something that I wrote. And it's talking about, religion and politics and how they all rely on a mindset of they and them, and that ultimately it's us. It's our ability to work together. And respect is like so essential for any kind of major breakthroughs in life. And my belief is that your beliefs can coexist like in a free society. I didn't see like this thought coming to me before this morning, but I was sitting there and thinking about the role HIV played and highlighting, the humanity behind social and political agendas that try to like separate us. And I don't really want to get too deep into that because so many things that divide us is where we just see each other as separate entities when we really are not. When you get down to like a biological illness or a virus, and then it has an equal opportunity to affect us all. Like COVID doesn't discriminate against black, white, young, old. It actually affects everyone. Everyone is affected. Everyone is struggling. Everyone is suffering. And, but back when HIV was a thing and it became a household problem, it's like everybody's secrets now were, you couldn't hide it anymore. It was an invisible disease until it wasn't, until people were dying and until, communities and families were impacted by the loss of their loved ones. And then the healthcare system wasn't even prepared to deal with that. And I'm not going to even judge like that whole process, but, it's the human factor related to a human experience that a sexually transmitted disease that could be spread to one person to another. And once you got past all the political and religious beliefs and you got down to the biology and you started looking at the science and the evidence, you created retroviral drugs that made it possible for people to live with HIV. And like we're literally following in their footsteps. We're to some degree, and I won't say to the same degree because I am not, my illness isn't judged the way someone who is gay or someone who, you know, is sexually active and unprotected. Like there's like, I'm not being judged the same way because mine is an airborne illness where theirs is a sexually transmitted disease. So I don't have the same stigmas associated with my illness, but I do have the same barriers to care that have been created by, you know, the misinformation and the, you know, breakdown between relationships that could actually be working together to help us all. And so I just wanted, that was just something that came across is just, you know, the takeaway is that we're all humans and these are biological conditions. These are not like moral judgments or ethical, you know, uh, situations we're talking about. But it's like once we move past all of that and we don't have to deal with the misinformation and the stigmas, then we can get down to solutions. And so the next book that moved me, it's called The Neuroscientist Who Lost Her Mind. It was written by Barbara Lipska. And so she is a neuroscientist that worked at the the National Institute of Mental Health. That is just like one house within the NIH. And her book was published in 2015. And she had melanoma that metastasized to her brain. And the way she describes the cognitive changes that she experienced and how it impacted her whole life and her work and her family. It was like I was able to see myself through her eyes. I was also able to see the connections between her treatment for melanoma and the resolution of her symptoms. And it's an amazing portrayal of just diagnosis, treatment, and restoring like metabolic function, education, science. Like I love science. Why do I love science? It's because you can't argue with it. I mean, you can argue with it, but you can't argue with peer-reviewed studies. And that's the beauty about science is that real science, you can, it's not like a competition. Maybe it's a competition to be the first one to say it, but amongst scientists around the world, they can argue, but they can also do individual studies. And so a peer-reviewed study has so much more credibility and so much more value than one person coming out and I did a study that showed what I know or what I think and I believe. But if you have a peer-reviewed study where you have two people studying the same thing and they find the same conclusions, then it becomes objective information. And that's a big part of the misinformation that people are subjected to today. And so anyways, the neuroscientist that lost her mind, it just shows like the cognitive changes that people experience that can't be explained or can't even be seen on on paper. So her story, her testament is just it is amazing, and it made me feel like okay, this makes sense because at this point I had MRIs and I had seen lesions on my brain, but everybody was like, "Well, if it gets worse, come back." Okay, no thanks. It's bad enough. So, and then that led me to the book. It's called A Common Struggle. And A Common Struggle was written by, I think, Patrick Kennedy. And again, this book was published back in 2015. And the reason why I enjoyed reading this book is it starts with, you know, Patrick Kennedy crashing a car into the the barriers at the Capitol building, and it talks about mental illness, and it talks about addiction, and whenever you are struggling to deal with an illness that people lack compassion, or they lack the knowledge to actually help you. So when I look at all the doctors that I went to go see, like, they couldn't even help me because they didn't know how to proceed. And so then that made me go look at similar diseases and conditions and look for a common root for what did they do to recover. And all of the things that you learn by studying other diseases and other disciplines is they do have some common threads and some neutrality, you know. Um, but the Kennedy, Patrick Kennedy, that wrote this book, it's pretty transparent about how, addiction and drugs and alcohol, the role that it played in their family. And the reason why I mention it is because some of the clients that I've helped in the past that can't get to Florida and can't get care, they're like, yeah, when I talk about my central sensitization training, these people go to organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous because it's free. And talking about addictions and just PTSD, like, other people will testify to the fact that Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous can help with other problems because of the way that they use their 12-step program. I don't know very much about it, but I've heard that it's really doing a lot of self-work and taking responsibility and surrounding yourself with resources and communities to help you make healthier choices that, support the kind of life you want to live moving forward. That book led me to another book called An Elegant Defense. It's it's a medical marvel of these women beating the odds. They had HIV, and then again, HIV, autoimmunity, and then discovering like how their bodies had turned against them. And I can completely relate to that situation. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's written by Matt Rochelle. And again, we're getting back to studying, disease and illness on a cellular level. That cellular level is a key component. It's like long COVID is a multi-system. It affects everything. It's not just your brain, it's your heart, it's your lung, it's your skin. It's like everything. And how do you get to the source of everything? And then that's when you go and you look on a cellular level. You look at your metabolic function. Your metabolic function is like key to your recovery. And that's why when you get divided up into your symptoms and your systems, you can't find a solution because you're hyper focusing on one thing. But the one thing that'll, improve everything is improving your metabolic function. So I get to talk about like Peter Attia in the book Outlive. So lying in bed, one of my favorite things that I came across and was the easiest thing for other people struggling with long COVID to kind of listen to and digest was the show called Limitless. It featured Chris Hemsworth. And I tell everybody with long COVID to watch it. And I love the entire series, but if you're struggling, you have a limited amount of attention span and the ability to listen, I tell people I'm episode 5 and 6. Episode number 6, it focuses on acceptance and just really helps you grieve in a way that you need to. And then you just also discover a new way of living with your limitations. And then episode number 5, I love that book. Not that book. I loved that episode because it focused on the mind and it focused on ancestral living, which also led me to another book. It's called Songlines. And this book was written back in 1987. And it talks about like Aboriginal people and how they sang the world into existence. and they could map out where they were in time and place based on the songs that they would sing. And so episode number 5 on Limitless, they're doing that. They go and they visit Aboriginal people in Australia, which I would love to do. Um, and this Limitless was where I was introduced to Peter Attia, and because Peter Attia goes along in this journey with Chris Hemsworth, and he um, educates Chris on the different types of, I don't even want to call them treatment options, but he just helps him explore his own biology. He did some workups on him like they did for me at Aviv, where they look at your genetic makeup and they look at what you're predisposed to. And dementia came up in Chris Hemsworth's workup, that he has a higher risk of dementia. But the whole goal of Peter Attia and Limitless and his book is to educate you on how you can improve your odds to outlive, meaning live a higher quality and better life. And then you can live longer than everybody, because who wants to be alive and just a vegetable? Like, when I live, I want to live to the end of my days. I do not want to die a slow death. And that's what I realized in reading Outlived, is that I was living a slow death. And then with my treatment and with my doctors and with everything, as it all just kind of unfolded and right in front of me, I learned about, how to use my body the way it was created, and how, like, society will tell you, that you can eat this, drink this, do that, take a shot, take a pill, and it's going to change your life. But the reality is that you're going to change your life. When you use your body the way it was created, okay, which is zone 2 training for me, right? That is that hunter-gatherer where, we didn't just put our food in the microwave and eat. We actually had to, use a low level of activity to get the things that we needed. Then once we got the things that we needed, we had to use our bodies to create them. I was reading in my journal the other day to kind of find inspiration for this talk. And in the beginning, after my long COVID diagnosis, I was living a reactive life. And my goal was to live a creative life. And human beings are not happy unless they're creating. When they're following and they're living a mundane life that doesn't have an ounce to do with who they are and who they can be, it's just perpetual. It's another slow death, but it's not a physical one. It could lead to it. But it's a spiritually slow death. And once you become awakened to, like, who you are and your purpose, and you find your mission, usually comes through trauma, then you start creating a life worth living, and one that can impact the lives of others. So in Outlive, Peter Attia's book, you get to take a deeper dive beyond what Limitless, the show, actually offers. That's where I had learned about Inago Samuelan. And I don't know if I read about him in the book first or not, but Inago Samuelan is another one of my heroes. And I found out about him when I went to the gym to sign up at Lake Nona Performance Club with my daughter, Quinn. And you got included in our membership, we got one kind of physiological testing. And at that point, I finished Aviv, and I was going to go to get help with VO2 max training, because I was doing what they had prescribed to me, and I started entering back into that push and crash. And so I asked him to train me on my VO2 max, and he said, actually, we have a thing that's called lactate testing. And Inago Samuelan, he hasn't published it yet, but it's about to be published as a study on lactate levels and long COVID patients. I was like, okay, yeah, let me hear about it. And so I did the lactate testing. super important that everybody needs to read it is because it talks about ancestral living, and that the beliefs about, death and illness is you were sick or you died or you survived because the gods ruled in your favor. And then that's medicine 1.0. Medicine 2.0 was like the evolution of, we created antibiotics, we created vaccines, we were able to do surgeries. We were able to do like interventions that allowed you to recover from traumatic injuries or illness or disease. But what Peter T is talking about in here is medicine 3.0. That is looking at your metabolic function. It's looking at when you change your behaviors and you use your body the way it was intended, and you take care of your body and give it the things that it needs, and you sleep, you eat, you exercise, you do all the things that you should be doing that allow you to be who you were meant to be. A lot of the things that we eat, a lot of the things that we do, they are driven by that primitive brain. Like, people would always say, well, why do I overeat? And it's just like, well, because whenever you were hunting and gathering and you saw a bunch of berries, you didn't know because it was seasonal. You're like, eat as much as you can, eat as much as you can. And the thing is like, we no longer have to put any work into consuming into consuming anything. Calories are energy, So Outlive is basically what I call a biological Bible, a 101. It was published in 2023. And I keep mentioning that these books were published before the pandemic because everybody wants to talk about, what they found out, what they found out. Well, they didn't find out anything new. They're just talking about it in a way to make them seem like this is a different problem. Long COVID is not a different problem. It's a metabolic dysfunction caused by a viral illness that invaded my cells. And then I am living with these senescent cells. It's a retroviral disease, just like HIV. What did we do in the instance of HIV? We created retroviral drugs to suppress the viral load inside the patients. And once that viral load is suppressed, okay, then people can go on to thrive and live in a healthier way. Healthy choices lead to a healthy life. That is like the universal truth. And I also failed to mention Dr. Will Cole. Again, that's one on nutrition. Like, Dr. Will Cole was the first book that actually had an impact on my recovery, because I couldn't eat the food that I used to eat because it triggered inflammation. It triggered all my symptoms. But let me just go ahead. I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Will Cole, Brene Brown, the Huron Lab, Peter Attia, Inagwa Semilon. Oh my God, I forgot to mention my favorite and new book. This is my new obsession. It's Sarah Myhill, and her book is The Diagnosis and Treatment of Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, Myalgic Encephalitis. It's not, it's mitochondrial. It's not hypochondria. So it's not in your head, basically. And so the way this book is about ME/CFS. And so you'll start to hear a lot of conversations where there are parallels that are drawn between ME/CFS and long COVID. So that's where I come and I start talking about retroviral diseases. Is like, what I'm experiencing after I had COVID is a retroviral illness. There are so many overlapping diagnoses of POTS, fibromyalgia, Guillain-Barré. Like, this retroviral situation is not something that's new. And so after doing all my research and finding out all the things that I found out, then I come back and I'm like, oh my God, there's decades, if not 100 years of data on the treatment of people after they suffered a cellular injury from a viral infection. Long COVID, or COVID itself, created structural damage, and it created a metabolic cellular injury that I've been trying to overcome for the last 3 years, going on 4 in September. But Once you know that that's what you're dealing with a structural problem. You are dealing with a cellular problem. You are dealing with the inability to make energy. That's what you're dealing with. You have a retroviral illness and you have a lack of evidence and you have a lack of support. But when you go back and you trace ancestral roots of how did people survive these things and how do they move on, it's that they had to. They had to. They couldn't just sit down and consume food and, live in a comfortable environment with air conditioning and heat. They actually lived outside in the elements. They actually had to, you know, build their shelters, make their fire, make their food, hunt their food. And that requires like a low level of energy consistently moving and doing things. And I know that whenever you move and you do too much, okay, and you do too much, that you experience the crash. Well, that's where the key component of the Whoop comes in. I use it differently. Yes, it's created for elite athletes, but the way I use it is I look at what their recommended strain is for an elite athlete, and I do 60 to 70% of their recommendation, and then I build up over time my energy. And energy is money. And I got that from Sarah Myhill. Energy is money. And if you can't make it, you can't spend it. And so, anyways, again, I just want to thank again Dr. Will Cole, Brene Brown, the Huberman Lab, Peter Attia, Inago Samilan, Dr. Sharon Mollem, Barbara Lepska, Matt Richel, Steve Gundy, another book, and Oprah. Like, where would I be without Oprah? Oprah really, there's a book I was listening to the entire time, and I still do when I can't sleep at night. And it's called What I Know for Sure. And it's the sound of her voice. And it's also just a compilation of stories that she tells of what do we know for sure. What I know for sure is throughout history, people have overcome many challenges by surrounding themselves with people who want them to heal and want them to get better. That's what I know for sure. What I know for sure is that I couldn't move, I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't get out of bed. I was struggling. I didn't want to live. I knew that for sure. And then what I've learned along the way, this entire journey, is that when you're curious about your illness and your circumstances, and then you don't give up, and then you find people who are willing to listen, who are willing to support you, who can go against the grain and think their own thoughts and not be fed information by people who are not trained in the discipline of the areas that they're relying on them. And then you learn to trust yourself. That's the first circle of trust. Once you learn to trust yourself, then you will learn to trust other people. And I'll tell you, before I had COVID, I didn't trust other people to the extent that I trust them now, because I can trust myself. And I really want to be a part of your journey, and I really want to help you lead. And I want to teach you how to let your body lead. And I, know that what I'm doing has helped myself and it has helped other people. And I really have only made this a personal journey where my close family and friends knew about it. And that's why now, longevity for the long haul. Once I had a handle on my illness and my approach, then I decided to share my story, because no two people are the same. My story is completely different from your story, but one thing that we have in common is that we want to reclaim our life, we want to heal, we want to be better, and you can. You can by learning to listen to yourself and finding and creating evidence that supports your recovery. So this is Danny with Longevity for the Long Haul. It's been a crazy day, and I apologize for not being a perfect speaker, but I'm here. And I look forward to our next episode where you get to talk to Matt Harris. He's going to talk to you about lactate testing and how it can improve your understanding of where you are functioning at a metabolic level. So then you can set reasonable goals that won't trigger inflammation, and you can slowly but steadily improve the quality of your life. Thanks again. This is Longevity for the Long Haul. Have a great day.